So now we will move on to the presentation of the 2024 Historic Preservation Awards. James.
I want to just say before James starts, because he kind of got thrown into this, and this is a big program, and it's a lot of work to put it all together and to go through the nominations and the judging process, and then evaluating, you know, what's really important. And we always try to get a combination of properties, and it's a fun part of what we do. And so, James, thank you.
Thank
James,
you.
big
Thank you,
part of
Marcy.
it this year.
Thank you. I'm James Sharon. I'm honored to be the presenter for this year's award ceremony. This year marks the 33rd year that Lake Forest Preservation Foundation has presented its annual preservation awards. The range and variety of properties honored since 1991 cover large and small houses and businesses, landscapes, and public spaces across Lake Forest. The goal of the awards is to showcase the best works and the owners and the architects that made it all happen. This year we have 10 awards representing preservation, heritage, rehabilitation, and infill. Lake Forest Preservation Foundation is excited to award the following properties. Please know we are thankful to the project designers, owners of these properties, their stewardship, their investment, their love, their attention to detail, each who have put into the projects to ensure that Lake Forest retains its historic character. The award categories are preservation, maintaining the historic integrity and character of a structure or landscape through conservation, maintenance, and repair. Heritage, the Heritage Award is for an older historic building that has changed character over its long history, such as the 1887 Presbyterian Church. Rehabilitation, continuing to use a historic structure through repair, alterations, and additions while protecting its historical, cultural, and architectural character, which includes adaptive reuse. Restoration, recovering, revealing, or representing the state of a historic structure or landscape as it appeared at a particular time in history. Reconstruction, recreating the form, features, and details of historic structure or landscape through new construction. Infill, building new construction that demonstrates exemplary contextual compatibility in an established neighborhood. And now on to the awards, which are the result of all the hard work that you've been hearing about all through all the various members and what they've achieved over these many decades. So the first one, preservation. This, and I hope you're able to see this because I think this is so fascinating. You've heard Crabtree Farm mentioned a few times, and I know you all know about Crabtree Farm in Lake Bluff, but this is where it started. Crabtree Farm started in Lake Forest on what became later Crabtree Lane. So this little garage, which is a remnant of what would have been a series of outbuildings left over from the first 1880s Crabtree Farm of Mrs. Scott Durand, who later moved to Lake Bluff, designed by the famous Illinois state architect William C. Zimmerman. Originally, the farm was at the corner of what would be Sheridan Road, Crabtree Lane, and Elm Tree of 20-plus acres. The fun story that Art has taught us is that the Lake Forest neighbors of all the surrounding estates that were not farms, as they were growing in their luxury, etc., were actually becoming upset by what was still a farm neighborhood. And all the baying cows and the noise became national news. It was in every newspaper in the entire country. I mean, this was because it was Lake Forest and people were complaining about cows. Well, at the same time all this happened, the Crabtree Farm that you know all happened in one major year. I mean, newspapers in every state in the country, and Mrs. Scott Durand was given as a gift from her husband the famous, beautiful Crabtree Farm, where she drove all her cows down Sheridan Road from this one, not just this little building, and this is just one outbuilding, onto the beautiful Crabtree Farm, and created what then became the world's most famous female-run dairy farm in the modern age. And so this is a wonderful little building, as it's a remnant of that initial beginning of what Crabtree Farm was. And the owners of the farm are Loanne and Rydell, and Norbert Rydell. And I believe they are here. Oh, hi. The second preservation award goes to a series of elements at 901 North Church Street. It's a house and a playhouse. The house, designed and built in 1928-29 for Margaret Granger Coles, did I get this right? Daughter of architect Alfred Granger, the architect of the house. This colonial revival house is noteworthy for its unique Chinese Chippendale fence. Now, many of you who've been down Church Street might know the famous fence, Church End Gate, which is interesting. I think we just learned in the last couple of days. The fence itself is a copy of Margaret's husband, Mr. Cole's famous family house in Farmington, Connecticut. This is a well-known fence and gate throughout the world of 18th century colonial architecture, and there is one in Lake Forest on Church Street that the Coles brought to their own house. So in addition to the wonderful house and all the preservation that's gone on over the years, is the jewel really in this award, which is this little playhouse. Recently restored to perfection, the 1908 Playhouse by architects Frost and Granger was originally designed for the Ezra Warner children, Jane and Marion. This playhouse was once on Washington Road around the corner as part of the original Warner estate. In the mid-50s, the Clark family, who were then living at Church Street, got the playhouse and brought it to their house. As you can see, it's a perfect gem. This charming cottage-style playhouse is even replete with a teeny potbelly stove inside. Note, Jane Warner, who the playhouse was built for as a child, later became Mrs. Edison Dick, who built the Greek Revival house that many of you know on 612 Woodland, designed by David Adler. The current owner is Susan Borma and her grandchildren.
And I don't think, is Whitney here to
Whitney?
accept it? Okay. We'll get it to her. Thank
Okay.
you.
The next award is for Heritage, and we have one Heritage Award, 190 North Sheridan Road. This award is for an older historic building that has changed little over its long history, such as the 1887 Presbyterian Church. This 4,500 square foot house, dated by newspapers in the walls, was built as early as 1876 as part of the post-Chicago fire wave of new residents coming to Lake Forest. It was modified in the 1886 and then again in 1912, working with architects Brown and Walcott. The Georgian east facade and sunken former garden near the house of the period reflect the early high point in Beaux-Arts estate house arts and crafts architecture of the North Shore. The current resident is Pamela Kleinhardt. We have 5 rehabilitation awards. The first is for a house at 1345 Lake Road. This 1912 lakefront bluff-top house was designed for the Donald McLennans by the Midwest's first AIA gold medalist architect, our own Howard Van Doren Shaw. The style was Shaw's prairie-style Renaissance with prominent Italian arches at the entry. Though maintained more or less until the 1980s, it was subdivided from its garage and gardens north and then rehabilitated by David Easton for the Folks. Easton added the tall window. Can you see that to the left of the arches? And you can see in the black and white where it wasn't there. So David Easton, who you all may know, was a very famous architect decorator. He came in here for the Folks, which he'd done a number of houses for, and really decided to kind of beef it up, maybe leaving a little bit of Shaw's country softness behind. Easton added that tall window, the north entry, all that rich detailing of rustication and coins, and really brought it to a new level. So today, really what's happening in the rehabilitation is it's a rehabilitation of the Shaw and the Easton house, because we now have gone so far into history that even what David Easton did has value, and he's a respected and noted architect in the U.S. So the Westemeyers with Northworks have done an extraordinary job of restoring the house as a kind of amalgam of the two periods of the architecture of Easton and Shaw, and they've done a perfect job.
Accepting the award is Nate Leatius, hopefully that's right, from Northworks.
Our Our second rehabilitation award is at 237 on Wensia. This handsome formal house is known and well known in town. If all of you driving down Green Bay, going north, you look to the right, and there across from Country Day School has always been this house at the end of the playing field. So that in itself is kind of a historic piece of landscape that we all love. Well, luckily, when the Nortons left a few years ago, everyone thought the house would get torn down, but it didn't. And if it had been torn down, not only would we lose that landscape part of our history, but we'd also lose this wonderful house. So we didn't lose it. The house built in 1939 for James Ramsey Meyer, and the architects were Edwin Hill Clark and Chester Wolcott. Edwin Hill Clark, also the architect of our own Lake Forest Library. The new owners have done an extraordinary job. The house had been a long time before it had been refreshed. Absolutely beautiful. Shutters restored, adding on a new garage exquisitely with all the right details, the landscape. It's probably more beautiful than it ever was, and we're lucky that someone fell in love with this house and brought it in to the 21st century. The rehab architect was John Berta, and the contractor was Wojtek Sobleski of MV Homes. The current owners are Shannon and Justin England. Our next rehabilitation award goes for 877 Woodbine Place, an international style house done in the 1960s by George Scott Hodgkins, the architect. So this is the architect's own house, and it's only ever had one owner, that architect, until today. He was trained at Princeton. He was the aforementioned stepson of one of the other Playhouse daughters, Marion Warner, and his spouse, Constance Addington Hodgkins. I don't know if any of you know the movie Ordinary People, but I loved it as a kid. And Mrs. Addington was a beautiful actress who appeared in the movie a couple of times. This was where she lived until her death a few years ago in 2019. The new owners, Miss Mermaine Lucas, a former TV anchor and current owner, curates the web presence of MaryRenane.com. The images, let's see, they've done an extraordinary job. We were all there, I think, for a mid-century house to be done with this level of style, even with replacing windows and adding formal gardens. I mean, it's the greatest example of the future of what preservation is, that even our modern houses can take a leap into the future with this kind of elegance. The current owners, the daughter is accepting, Catherine Mermaine Teskey. The fourth award for rehabilitation at 425 North Sheridan Road. The English Arts and Crafts Gates. So can you see on the right, the color photograph, and on the left, the black and white, virtually unchanged. I know you all drive it every day. It's right there at the juncture of where the Lake Forest College is. We're lucky this stays there, sort of anchoring the middle of town, as are the original coach house and gates to the 1915 Robert Thorne estate. The current owners have completely restored the coach house and the gates. That's taking off the gates, stripping off the paint, extraordinary amount of work they've done. In addition to that, as you all might know, they extended the beautiful brick wall further north along Sheridan Road. The original architect of the cottage and gate was John Mackenzie of Kansas City, and also foreign where had been posted before assuming the presidency of Montgomery Ward. The 1915 gates, posts, and walls and cottage construction were supervised by Max Dunning, a Chicago architect. So Mackenzie was the architect of the estate, the Thorne estate, which was for the Montgomery Ward Company. The main house was demolished many in the 1950s. The current owners are Lisa Wolf DiGianacci and Mark DiGianacci. And they're not here. But they did a wonderful job. Thank you. Fifth Rehabilitation Award goes to our wonderful Lake Forest Library Dome. The dome, which is the center of our entire town, and I think the sort of gleaming beauty of everything we're about, by architect Edwin Clark, as you all know, was sad and sick for a very long time, covered in, I don't know, kind of a COVID thing or whatever it was, even before COVID. It was like a precursor to COVID. It was really sick, and it was dangerously so, because everyone knows underneath the dome are one of the most beautiful murals in the nation. It can be completed in 2024. And as are the murals. If all of you have been in there, the murals have been restored. It's just the whole thing. It's the most extraordinary thing. I think in a funny way right now, with everything that Brian's talking about and all that's sort of on the table and all the good that's going on here and maybe some of the scary future bad, it's perfect timing that this would sit right in the middle and show what we can do and that it matters. So thank you, Library and Lake Forest, for.
Accepting is Heather Strong.
Oh, it's Heather Strong. Thank you, Heather.
And maybe- I just want to say that Heather was very instrumental in this restoration, and we
Yes.
really thank
Yeah.
her staying on it. And Ishwar, who's also the new director, is also here, and welcome to Lake Forest, and we look forward.
The jewel in our crown. Yeah, thank you.
We also have two other trustees and a current staff member, and Susan Adams.
Susie, all right.
We're well covered. We're well
Yes,
covered.
yes.
Thank you.
The last two awards are for infill, which is a wonderful thing that Art and Marcy and all those that have come before had the idea of doing so. Because what a great way to inspire where we're going, or what are we doing right? Aside from all the old buildings we have, what are we doing right? The first one at 61 Sequoia Court by Northworks Architects is a series of Cotswold buildings, but in a modernist form, as if all the buildings were built over time. If any of you have been to the Cotswolds, like a farm connected with beautiful, strong chimneys, exquisite stonework, beautifully laid out in the landscape, tucks perfectly into Sequoia. A wonderful addition to the Lake Forest landscape. The shed dormers are typical of more of a country house. The forms, the balance, the details, everything about it is lucky for us. And as Art pointed out, it's a bit of a return to, and any of you who have been around long enough, in the mid-century, here, let's say post-mid-century, there was a thing called the New Formalist. And that was architects who maybe were tired of sort of a sort of empty sort of mid-century, and they became fascinated again by classical architecture, and they were doing things like our R.I. Colburn, who was building Palladian houses with arches, which were really traditional, and a building like this was also popular back then. And so Northworks is actually returning to a return that was to a return. I mean, this is a great thing, and they're doing a beautiful job. And the contractor of it is Legacy Construction, and the current owner is Laura Gable.
Laura couldn't be here.
Laura can't be here.
But Elizabeth Decatus is accepting, and Nate can also come up again.
Oh, and Nate, right.
From Northwood.
Yes.
So you don't get another.
Right. Our last award and our second infill award is for a house at 810 Barbary Lane. And I hope many of you might have the opportunity to drive and see this house. I found it particularly exciting. As a young guy in Lake Forest who always loved what we all call the A.B. Dick House by Ralph Millman, also the architect of our post office, I was pleasantly surprised and excited when I saw this new building coming into Lake Forest. So you could say you'd build a new house in Lake Forest and you were inspired by David Adler. Or you might say you're going to build a new house in Lake Forest and you're inspired by Howard Van Shore and Shaw and his villa style. This family was inspired by the great sort of 1930s Art Deco French-esque work of Ralph Millman and others of the time. And I think they've done an extraordinary job. The house that I'm speaking of often is the Sterling Morton A.B. Dick house at 975 North Lake. It's just around the corner. So this is a perfect example of infill. This is the sort of local vernacular of that neighborhood. It's an extraordinary building of limestone, slate, sort of Art Deco, neoclassical details. It really a beautiful creation. The current owners are Elizabeth and Richard Hoffman.
And they're not here.
And they're not here.
James, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay.
I mentioned when we first started about the whole awards, and I wanted to recognize Pete O'Malley, who was really the chair of the committee and did all the running and background stuff. So Pete, why don't you stand up? Pete did a really nice job. So thank you, Pete. So this concludes our 2024 annual meeting and awards presentation. Again, thank you. I'm going to miss all of you. Thank you for the beautiful vase. You know, the board knows I love flowers, and that will be well used. Thank you.